Even though I should have taken the account about witness. Oh my gosh, okay. Oh, I'm getting out of myself. Libraries and for having greater, you gotta calm down. And actually, use this Okay, so the Joy defines AI as the ongoing quest to give computers the ability to perceive the world, to make judgments, to generate creative work, and give them the ability to communicate with humans. That is different. If you were with us before on our last book, You Look Like a Thing and I Love You. Different definition, same concept. Do you agree with that definition of AI? Do you think it's too limited, too narrow, too broad?
I think it's way too broad.
Too broad?
Yeah. It could theoretically do all of those things or some of those things. But I would probably say that although we would like it to do those things, I'm not sure that we're anywhere close yet. We may be able to trick ourselves into an approximation of those things, and I'll get into those details as we talk. But,
yeah.
It's theoretically possible, but there are some limitations. So
do you think that's too forward-looking then for her to kind of broadly speculate that AI is this, like that is the, I get, because she's kind of giving it a goal, right, in that definition, and you're right, that's really not the reality. So does that hurt, I guess, the efforts to develop AI and even like regulation?
I mean, I think thinking about the aspirational possibility of AI may help us to grapple with it today, with its limited reality. We can infer or assume or predict something about what might happen as a natural consequence of what we're working on right now to go into that next level. It's the same kind of thinking that we did, you know, when Star Trek was out and Data was a cyborg that was running around. We talked a lot about that. There's a very famous episode, The Measure of a Man, in Star Trek, which talks about you know, what makes a cyborg human or not human or this kind of thing. We had nowhere near the kind of capability that we do today, and yet we were still thinking about those questions philosophically. So I think this is framed in a similar kind of way as that.
And do you think that is helpful when you think about, you know, obviously a theme throughout the book she talks about is regulation, or really the lack thereof. And part of the problem she defines about halfway through the book is the fact there's really no standard is it that nobody's willing to give a definition, or just that it's so distinct for, you know, language and text versus visual, or like where do you see this problem, I guess, with that?
I think the biggest problem, in my opinion, is that there are not enough people who understand the technology that are in a position to guide or decide policy things. So we're depending a lot on, you know, corporate initiative and corporate motivation, and also members of our political organization that also reach out to technical people to sort of help guide and frame their results. I don't think there's enough of that communication going on. Part of it depends on admitting that you don't know what you're talking about. And that's a difficult thing to accept. So, yeah.
Do you think part of that is the accessibility? I mean, anybody could pull out their cell phone right now and be like, oh yeah, I have AI.
Right.
And so then do I just know what AI is? And is that like almost offensive to like you? You're like, I've literally been in this field defining it for years. I'm a department chair, and you and your little iPhone and your chat GPT is like, yeah, I know what AI is.
I mean, you're using it. That's great. Don't want to take anything away from that. But it's kind of like saying to somebody, I definitely know how a car works because I can press the button or turn the key and it goes vroom vroom, and therefore I know how a car goes. It's
Fair.
not the same,
Yeah.
right? The difference between the knowledge that I have and the knowledge that a mechanical engineer would have to take apart the entire thing, put it back together, is a very different level of understanding.
Yeah.
And we need to design policy based on that level of understanding and not a more layperson's understanding.
Yeah.
And the reason is not for anything other than, like, for example, I'll give you an example that involves roads. In the 50s and the 40s, there was a very, very high rate of car accidents and deaths that resulted in car accidents
Yeah.
or from car accidents. Part of the reason is because we didn't know really how fast cars drove and how velocity worked. And like, we didn't know how those things interfered with stuff.
Yeah.
So one of the things is we created a commission for that and resolved it by doing simple things like angling the roads on curves so that it's less likely that you're going to drive off the side of the road with a 15-degree angle. That's just standard nowadays. We just assume that the car is going to rise up a little bit on an incline so that it stays on the road and doesn't fly off. That's a skill that we needed engineers and to tell us about. They had to explain that civil concept, and then we had to implement it. So
Has
same
that
idea.
happened though in AI in any regard? Because I feel like AI is not a singular entity.
It's happening
Oh, okay.
slowly
Yeah.
and in individual pockets. I think we're in the stage of awareness now, I think, where we maybe realize that something is wrong, but we can't
Yeah.
quite figure out how to fix it. And then there are also a bunch of people running to the profit motive to try to find money as quickly as possible. So you have those two things competing with each other. On the one hand, profit motive drives innovation, at least from the corporate sector. But on the other hand, you do have to have something that sort of balances that out. So,
Well, and Joy makes it clear. You know, she talks about how her work was criticized by Amazon. She felt like Amazon was coming after her, and I mean, they kind of were. And so, how in this space can you balance? Really, I mean, because there is a benefit to industry and money being backed behind it and the development, but I mean, it must be so hard to be a researcher and say you have flaws in this system that need to be made public. And I mean, are you like dissuaded from doing any of that kind of work? Is it like, oh, don't go against the gates, man? Like you gotta back off. I mean, she's a graduate student,
right.
and she's like, hey, Amazon, you got a problem, and here's the data to back it up. That takes cojones. And she just full went into, I mean, is that something that you're like discouraged from doing? Or is it like something you try not to do? Or is it something that you think needs to happen?
Me personally,
Oh, yeah.
I don't care. So
Oh.
I'll do whatever. As long as the science is correct, I'm good to go for it. So,
Yeah.
and I think most academicians feel the same way. In fact,
Really?
even a lot of the people who are researchers at these institutions, think tanks at Google's research group and all that sort of stuff, they think the same way. But sometimes, you know, you can't always express every criticism in that kind of environment. I mean, that's just the way that it is. So,
Do you wish you had another outlet?
I'm sorry?
Do you wish you had another outlet to express your criticism? And can this be your outlet?
No, I mean, I think in some sense, what you're speaking to actually is the fact that the academic ivory tower, if you will, is part of that safeguard. That's part
Yeah.
of what insulates us from, you know, these kinds of things, because we don't, theoretically at least, have an ulterior motive that prevents us from
Yeah.
identifying issues and fixing them over time. So
Yeah.
I think you do have to have that connection between the two. And, you know, to that point, Joy is indeed an academician first and an advocate second. right?
Mhm.
And that gave her the platform to pursue this conversation in a meaningful way. She had to grapple with the hurdles that typically anybody does when
Yeah.
you're busting open an industry or something like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's important. And there are other works like this. Kathy O'Neill wrote Weapons of Math Destruction. That's another book in this same vein
Mhm.
that talks about this kind of thing. And I think Kathy was mentioned a couple times in the book too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What do you think about the you know as a department chair, department head? What do you think about the bravery it takes for a student to speak up and do the work she's doing? Because I mean, she talks about how it took a lot of guts for her to really come. She knew she wanted to pursue the topic, but you see throughout the first like half of the book her going, oh, I could pick something easier. I could pick something less controversial, and maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe it's too much. I mean, do you think that speaks to the environment at MIT, or maybe just her resilience, a little bit of both?
Um, her actions are the result of her own resilience. I can say that. And I would say that her hesitation to act is normal. I don't think that that's anything weird. It would happen anywhere,
Yeah.
whether you're working in a company, competing with your boss about something or the other, or you're doing this kind of thing. I am terrible at that.
I talk with my
So
hands too. It's terrible.
I'll talk with this left hand instead.
Yeah, and I'll talk
that's
with the right, and we'll be balanced.
correct. We'll create that balance. No, I don't think it's unusual at all. I think that, I mean, MIT definitely did nurture that kind of intellectual discourse. And she took advantage of that. It took her time to figure out how she can find her place in that whole conversation. But she did. So that worked out.
Oh,
Yeah.
it seems to have worked out. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
her work. I mean, forward looking and looking back. I mean, pivotal. It's
Yeah.
really what is needed right now in the field, and just based on her framing. And I think what's really beautiful about reading this book now is that you can see, like we can see, I mean, because we're interacting with AI pretty much every day of our lives, and to see like the ways that it's integrated into like our everyday lives, and to read like, oh, here are some things you should be thinking about. Here are some shortcomings and some limitations that nobody has addressed, and it's just like being rolled out. Being able to like see it in real time just every day is, I don't know, it's made me think about all of the different AI applications that I'm seeing in my work life and in my personal life. I'm just seeing them in a whole different light after reading this book. And I'm going to bring that to our first turn and talk, because one of the fundamental assumptions that I think a lot of Joy kind of has to deconstruct for her to do her research is that a lot of people believe that AI is just unbiased because it is a computer. It's a computer. It's numbers. A computer can't be biased. What are you talking about? There's no way. And that is, as we learn in the book, fundamentally flawed. And she gives us a lot of examples. And so I want to ask as our turn and talk and to our live audience, did you have that assumption? Maybe not now after reading the book. I don't know. I think it'd be kind of hard to like keep that opinion after reading this book. But did you come into this book with that opinion that like algorithms, computers, math, there's no way it's unbiased. That is an unbiased, neutral platform. And if you did that opinion change? Have you ever held that opinion? And then what did change that opinion or that thought of AI? And was it this book? Was it maybe not this book? I think I felt the same way I have to admit, I saw AI and I saw like just broadly the concept of algorithms as it's an equation. How could that be biased? And then through the years and watching this evolve, I have had personal growth in that area where I've had to turn and say, oh, like there's clearly a lot going on. But it takes people like Joy doing this kind of work. So I want to, I guess, turn and talk and bring that to you guys, and we'll come back in a couple minutes. And I'd love to hear your examples of maybe when that like moment clicked for you. Thanks. Okay. Yeah, so we'll keep talking on the live stream.
Sounds great.
And then we'll come back as a group. That's got to be a prevalent belief. Do you run into that all the time, that people go like, how can it be? What's the problem? It's a computer.
I think a lot of that comes from the fact that these days we think of technology and the things that you do with technology as being essentially impervious. And
Yeah.
part of that is because of our intense desire to simplify those things which we don't understand and we theoretically don't need to,
Ooh,
right?
Yeah.
For example, Google search is AI. No one asks the question, is this harmful? I mean, we do now, but we didn't
Yeah.
for 25 years.
No.
We were overjoyed that we could find out information on the web.
Yeah.
And turns out that uses AI. That is fundamentally artificial intelligence. And
Oh.
Google Maps, the autopilot
No.
on a plane that we depend on regularly,
That's AI.
the parallel parking that a Tesla or some other car will do for you,
Yeah.
all of it's AI. Siri, AI. All of that is AI because it's trying to calculate answers based upon questions that we have. A better way to describe AI, in my opinion, is to define it as basically searching for an answer. You are given a problem, the solution is so difficult that you cannot get a direct, concrete answer to that question.
Yeah.
So you have to use good guesswork and intuitive understanding of how the problem works in order to come up with a guess. That's all AI really is. The
Yeah.
reason that it's terrifying to us now is we're good. Thanks.
Yeah. No, I'll probably grab some cans to go though,
Thank you.
because I need more than one. I'm telling you, if y'all have never been to Ashen Elm, it goes hard.
You should come. It's
Yeah,
super
yeah.
mean, super serious,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
super real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not
Really
generated by AI. That's organic.
Not generated by AI.
Yeah.
Excellent point.
Although I've seen beer companies are like, oh, this beer was like AI generated. Like I put it in Chat GPT and they gave me the recipe and that's what this is. That's
Yep.
crazy.
Yeah, that's a little crazy. Yeah, so I mean, search in and of itself and the way that you find solutions in AI is not inherently problematic. But there
Yeah.
are, I mean, speaking to the bias question, there are really two forms of bias that you can talk about. One is data-based bias, which is that your data set is incorrect and
Yeah.
invalid or not sufficiently representative. There are lots of ways in which the data can be flawed, or it could be completely representative, but based on ideals that we no longer carry. For example,
Okay.
the 1950s hiring practices of GM, the company. Those are not things we want to emulate today.
No.
Even GM would not want to emulate those today. So the point is that if you use that data, you're going to only get those kinds of conclusions. So you have to balance that. And the
Yeah.
other one is algorithmic bias. That's much less common and much
Okay.
less severe
Yeah.
because most of the time it's just that we're not encoding what we really want as answers. So, for example, if you tell an AI that you want a robot vacuum cleaner that does not run into any furniture,
Yeah.
that is something you want.
Yeah.
You want it to make sure it doesn't scratch up any furniture. Noble goal. An AI might determine that the best path of action is to simply sit still and do nothing because then it cannot run in to any furniture.
Yeah.
So
You know what? Fair.
it cannot.
Yeah.
Okay. So the point is that if you look at that and you say, well, what's the problem here? Is it the algorithm's problem? No.
No.
It determined a correct solution to your problem.
Yeah.
You just asked the wrong question.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you have to moderate it. So let's say you, in that same example, you adjust it to say, okay, but you must move. So now the AI spins around in circles. It is moving.
Yeah.
It will never hit a piece of furniture because it's only going around in circles. Have you satisfied the requirements? You have. But it's still not doing what you want it to do. So
Yeah.
part of the difficulty with AI is that sometimes we're not used to the idea that we need to ask it for something. Bringing it back to Joy's book, we wanted solutions to Google searches. What if somebody typed in something and it only gave you negative hits that you don't want?
Mhm.
So, as an example, Google actually got into some trouble for this one. They fixed it relatively quickly. But the idea that if you Googled black girls, you got porn hits. And if you Googled white girls, you got uplifting examples of successful women. Now,
Okay.
But
Yeah.
but the point is, why did Google give that answer?
Yeah.
It's because it turned out that most of the people who Googled black girls actually were looking for porn hits. And so when they clicked on those and they found those porn hits, turns out that's reinforcement for Google to say,
Yeah.
hey, this is what people want. This is what I will give you. Now,
Yeah. That's
AI is not at fault there. It's a reflection
No.
on our society.
yeah.
But if we want it to behave differently, we have to recognize that, realize the problem, and then encode for it.
Yeah.
That is an algorithmic problem,
Interesting. Okay.
right? But this is not necessarily that the formula is wrong. It's telling us how to optimize our actions.
Yeah.
Just like the robot that runs around in circles, it does the two things you wanted perfectly every time.
Yeah.
So then you don't ask questions. So
So Joy mentions that sometimes like a connection, like a node in AI is strengthened or weakened, and the programmers might not know why. Is that an example of algorithmic bias where you just don't know why? I mean, maybe you figure it out
Yeah,
eventually, but
yeah.
something is getting reinforced in that connection, and you're like, well, that's not exactly what I intended.
So what she's talking about is the neural network pathway.
Yeah.
Where, so that's a different kind of thing.
Okay.
What I'm talking about here is the notion that when you want to do something, you have to be extremely clear about what
Yeah.
you want it to do.
Yeah.
That's one place where algorithmic bias can come in. What she's talking about is algorithmic opacity, which is the idea that the more opaque you make the internal decision making for an algorithm, the harder it is on the back end when we see the output and we're trying to figure out what went wrong.
Yeah.
We don't have any clarity on that. If somebody tells you that this particular numeric weight is 0.37 instead of 0.42, and now because of that difference, you're
Yeah.
getting a completely different answer.
Yeah.
We as human beings can't parse why that happened. It's not easy for us to figure out.
Interesting.
And that's actually part of the reason why we really like AI. AI is very good at detecting patterns that we don't notice.
Mhm.
I think part of the problem is, and weirdly, what AI is really doing is making clear how much bias we actually currently have in today's society, because it's
Yeah.
doing so in such a clean way and in an unbiased way.
Yeah.
And it's pointing out that we people are flawed and that we need to do something about it.
Yeah.
And the tendency of human beings to say, oh, it's the algorithm that's at fault. It's
Yeah.
the technology that's at fault. So let's shut it down. Is a it's a knee-jerk reaction to something that's actually endemic to human society. It's that we as people are flawed. And it turns
Yeah.
out AI is just patterning our flawed answers
Yeah.
or our flawed past into flawed future.
Ooh.
All it's doing is pattern detecting
Yeah.
the old and then telling us answers that match our old patterns.
Yeah.
Well, if our old patterns were flawed and terrible and misogynist and racist and otherwise problematic,
Yeah.
it's going to give us the same answers because it thinks that's what we want.
How would it? So
How would it
So
know
I
any
guess
different? Yeah,
the like technical answer is, well, it is unbiased,
it is.
comma, but
Yes. Weirdly, the right way to address this lack of bias in AI is to actually bias the algorithms.
The other way?
You have to counter bias the opposite way to arrest this. And
Yeah.
weirdly, in human society, we have thought about this. That's what the
Oh.
affirmative action concept is.
Yeah.
Right? How do we address the fact that we were unfair to a certain population?
Yeah.
We give them opportunities that aren't equal, right?
Yeah.
They're equitable,
Yeah.
no, but they're not equal,
Yeah.
right? So you're
Yeah.
creating equity but not
Yeah.
equality. That concept is a human non-technical response.
Oh.
How do you balance the bias? You counter bias in the
Yeah.
opposite direction. You give preferential treatment to those who have been oppressed and held back.
Yeah.
So interestingly, that's actually one of the strategies to address this issue is bias mitigation and counter bias. So when she was talking about
Oh.
the what is it? The coded gaze
Oh, yes,
and the
yes,
white
yes, yes.
mask conversation. That was exactly what she was doing. Is she
Yeah.
was counter biasing, partially by addressing the data set, which she talked about for many, many pages.
Yeah.
And then the other part is algorithmic, which she didn't bore us with because that would send everybody to sleep. But that's the more interesting part to me.
You're like,
So-
I read that paper.
I read that paper. Yes.
So I'm going to go ahead and bring us back
Yeah.
because, okay, I want to bring us back because you just brought me to the catch 22. We just roundabout fully came to the answer is it isn't biased. That was the conclusion we came to. The initial misconception is actually not a misconception, fully correct. So I want to, before I dive into what our conversation did, because that so fully and perfectly came full circle, and I have to share that. I'm going to need you to TLDR that for everybody here in a second. But I want to hear from you guys your thoughts on like AI bias and what Joy talks about in the book, and maybe your preconceived notions. And if your opinion changed reading this book, because I think my opinion of how like AI and algorithms can be biased was totally changed by the details and the examples Joy provided in this book. Because there were just some of the examples she gave were just things I had never thought about. Because I really only think of AI in a text sense. And so like the visual aspect is totally mind blowing to me. Yeah. Ooh, gene splicing. Yeah. 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 Yeah, and so for those of you watching on the live stream, you gave a great example of gene editing and how back when in the 70s, it was like you just had no idea where this was going, and I would say a healthy dose of fear, honestly, not even really fear mongering. I mean, who knows? Super viruses. They were talking about human gene editing, which did happen, but that's a different conversation for a different day. But ultimately, the regulation came, and the rulemaking came, and institutions stepped up, and we're kind of in that phase now with AI. And I don't know, it's kind of hard to regulate something and set standards for something. You don't know where it's going to go in 20, 30 years. And you're kind of trying to set the framework and you want to set a good foundation. You see what happens when you don't set a good foundation. And we're seeing what's happening when you don't set a good foundation. Do you think that regulatory bodies and institutions are setting themselves up for, I would say a prosperous future for AI?
I don't know how to answer that.
That might be a little, yeah, in 20 years, how about you get back to me?
We'll
We'll see if it
sure,
works.
no problem. No, I mean, for a long time, whenever you're developing a technology, you're more focused on outcomes, results. Is it working? Is it good? Is it worth it?
Yeah.
So for, the last 10 or 15 years, that's been the process.
Yeah.
Now we're sort of realizing what it can be used for, where it can be used, where its power lies, and now we're trying to, ratchet it back a little bit to make sure that we understand that it doesn't get out of our control.
Yeah.
It's interesting that a lot of people think that AI is relatively new. It, in fact, was one of the very first things we thought about when we built the computer science discipline to begin with.
Oh, God.
So Alan Turing, who was considered the modern father of computer science, the basis upon which he built this was in fact AI. The Turing test and all of those kinds of things were AI-based questions, and that preceded any of the technology we have today. So AI was actually the very first thing we thought about, and it's been going along all this time. And interestingly, AI has been a roller coaster kind of discipline. It's gone way up when we thought we had it solved, and then it went straight down to the bottom when we were like, oh, that didn't do everything we wanted it to. And then it came back up and it went back down. We're in the high of large language learning models, this kind of facial recognition stuff. All of this stuff is associated with the current high. And eventually it'll calm down when we realize what the limits of it are. And there are limits mathematically.
For sure.
So,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's good to think about these kinds of things. In fact, if Alan Turing hadn't thought about AI, we'd probably be speaking German right now because we would have lost the war. So there is that issue. World War II, just to be clear. World War II, to be,
Fair.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think with a lot of biases with AI, it really depends on the structured and unstructured data, the data that they feed into it. So I'm curious kind of what you think. I think there's a lot of talk of, especially with Google's AI with hallucinations is coming up with because these large language learning models, they're only based, their decision making is based on the algorithm and the information that is prioritized. But I think the big issue is that a lot of these companies are not disclosing their sources and where they're getting all this data from. And I think it's probably pretty obvious because they're getting it from all over the internet, including copyrighted.
Oof. Yeah.
So just kind of wondering what your thoughts are.
Let's go.
So I think you asked 3 questions in that comment. So let me separate them if you don't mind. The first question is whether or not companies that utilize certain things in the data set are allowed to and should. That's the copyright-based question.
Yep.
I think that is, let's assume for the moment that they only use vetted, acceptable, open use kinds of things. That's a different liability legal conversation, which is parallel to this conversation, but we can ignore that for the sake of this conversation. The second part is how it is that you take this notion of using data sets from everywhere, because you might want to curate those data sets. For example, some news sources are just propaganda machines. They're not real information. And so you want to cull those out. So that's a separate component of the data set. And then out of what remains, let's call this clean vetted data that we're allowed to use. You're talking about the concept of hallucinations. Let me explain what a hallucination is. Basically what it's doing is it's taking data patterns from a ton of information that's clean and vetted, let's say, and then it's producing something that sounds right because it matches the pattern of that data. But the goal of ChatGPT and DALL-E and all of these different generative AI techniques is not to produce valid factual information. That's not the goal. The goal is to generate something that answers your question and sounds plausible. And that is where you're thinking of the concept of a hallucination. It is a hallucination in the sense that it's fabricating sources out of nowhere or doing stuff that no human being would reasonably expect to succeed, like providing a fake will for somebody or doing a deep fake of, Bill Gates or whatever it is. The point is that is just its attempt to match a pattern. We haven't imposed accuracy as a necessary requirement for ChatGPT. Would it be nice? Great. And to the extent that the answer matches the pattern, it will be accurate, but it isn't required to be completely correct. For an example of how they've tried to address this, go look up Scholar AI. Scholar AI is a Google offshoot or an OpenAI offshoot that is only focused on scholarly work. And that one doesn't fabricate sources. It knows that that's a big no-no. And so it only uses real research papers. So it's a limited, cleaned, vetted data set, like I was describing. And then it doesn't give false information that it just fabricates based on patterns. It knows some boundaries for where it can and cannot construct text. And that's an example of a case where you're seeing very clearly that AI does what we tell it to do. If we're not clear enough about what we want, it's going to give us garbage, right?
Yeah.
It's like saying 2 + 2 is equal to 5 for very large values of 2. It's like you can't change the value of 2. That's not allowed, right? But AI might say that.
Yeah.
And you'll be like, oh, of course, for very large values of 2, it's obviously 5. Obviously. Right?
I mean, yeah,
Correct.
I'm definitely the expert on this, and yes, it's definitely 5.
Definite for extremely large values of 2.
Extreme.
Extraordinarily large.
Well, and so I want to dive into this the importance of a clean database and not even just a clean database of your database and your training materials on your product. I mean, Joy talks a lot about that in the, her facial recognition. How obviously that's very important in the development of whatever AI tool you're trying to develop. But I want to know what your thoughts are on, adopting this. She talks about apartment complexes trying to adopt facial recognition in lieu of, like keys even. And she talks even about some public sector applications and how, if it's public sector, shouldn't that be a little more transparent on like the efficacy of this across different minority groups? And like, shouldn't we have a little bit more? Shouldn't there be a little bit more to the? It just feels like we're seeing this when it's deployed, and then we're going, oh, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't actually think to test it on everybody, and now she talks about people being denied opportunities, and it's just, especially in something, she talks about like loan applications, job applications, and we're talking about apartments, and we're talking about police forces and Homeland Security's now looking into AI, and like there's no transparency in these. Like, what are they using? There's no standardized database. There's no set of like, here's the minimum requirements your tool needs to meet in order to be deployed. Does that exist? Should that exist? I mean, whose responsibility is that? That was another 5 questions for you.
It was another 5 questions. So I would say, I think some of what's happening here is that the algorithms that are being used are in some cases not opaque. In other words, they're not transparent, because the nature of the way that they compute things is that computers are trying to pick up and detect patterns that human beings cannot notice. For example, if you deploy 1,000 seismic sensors to figure out if there's going to be an earthquake, no human being is going to be able to look at all 1,000 feeds and determine whether or not there's going to be an earthquake until it's already over. We're just not that fast, and we're not that dedicated to be able to figure that out cleanly. But a computer can figure that out.
Yeah.
So some of what you want is for it to detect patterns that you can't tell. But let me turn this question a little bit on its side to explain to you where the real hesitation is. Let's suppose that I set up a facial recognition system,
Okay.
and every person in an apartment building was walking through. But what I told you is it's not for key access. It's that every day, one of the people who scans in is going to get $1 million for free from the tenant organization. Now, do we have a problem with that facial recognition? Not at all.
Nope.
So the problem isn't that it's recognizing our face. It's that we're worried about the possible negative uses of our faces.
Yeah.
It's about the intent behind its use.
Yeah.
And that's fundamentally a human question. It's
Yeah.
not an algorithmic one,
Yeah.
right? So that's one part of the conversation.
Terrifying.
And here's another example of a scenario where if I explain this to you, you'll be like, there's nothing wrong here. So this is where human beings like programmers or computer scientists like myself can make mistakes. So let's suppose that I'm looking at a bunch of data coming in from job applicants for a position.
Yeah.
Now, I am trying to figure out if I can algorithmically determine who are the candidates I should bring in to interview.
Mm-hmm.
So I want high quality candidates that are going to be successful in their job. So let's suppose that I look at all of this information.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, some of the information that is here also includes the apartment number of those people who have applied for the job. As an algorithmicist, do you find that problematic? Probably not. You're like, well, that has no relevance to whether or not I should invite a person to come and be interviewed as a candidate. But it turns out if you include that information, it will disproportionately not select those people because an apartment number, just the existence of a number for an apartment being in somebody's address tells you something about their socioeconomic status, their class, where they live, right?
Yeah.
That's a pattern that AI will detect, and it will use apartments as a way to detect that. Now, that is seemingly benign information
Yeah.
that has no impact on whether or not they're qualified for a position in HR or something like this.
Well, yeah.
But it turns out it has a really big impact on that. And as computer scientists, it's hard to tell that that's going to have an effect.
Yeah.
It's completely out of nowhere that
Yeah.
that has an effect, but it does. So we have to cull that from the data set. So now
Yeah.
we're removing information that might create unintentional bias.
Mhm.
And that's part of the whack-a-mole feeling of AI. At the end of the day, we're guessing and trying to figure out patterns.
Well, so but how does that work for when you're trying if you're trying to set a guideline and you're trying to say these are the standards you need to meet to deploy this tool in an ethical way, but you're not if you're not sure what it may or may not pick up on, how do you like where is I don't know, like where do you even start with something like that?
I think part of the problem is that policy is necessarily going to be consequence focused and outcome focused.
Okay.
But the way in which you arrive at those metrics is potentially problematic. So I think Joy mentions an example in her book where some organization came up with a very high recognition success rate
Oh yeah, I
on
don't
something or
remember
the
which.
other, right?
Yeah.
I believe it was IBM, right?
I want
But
that
the
sounds
question
right.
is, how much counter bias did they put in to fabricate that solution?
Yeah.
They got a great answer, but what other metrics did they destroy in the process? What other consequences will there be that we don't understand until
Yeah.
after it's deployed, right?
Yeah.
How many people will be denied a loan on the basis of the fact that the third letter in their last name was a W?
Yeah.
We'll find out, based on, so
Yeah.
we don't know the potential consequences of that thing. And in some sense, we can never know, right? That's difficult to ascertain. It's not a very satisfying answer, but unfortunately, it is an answer.
Well, because I mean, what
Yeah.
stops a private entity really from deploying discriminatory?
Nothing.
Out,
But that's the same answer you would give when you asked what stops a bad actor from doing bad things. The answer is nothing. So
I mean, you
it's
could
the
argue
same argument. Yeah.
laws and regulation provided at least a de-incentivize to an extent some of that activity.
They de-incentivize, but it still happens.
For
We
sure.
regularly find people for violating the EPA. We
Oh.
regularly find people for murdering other people, right? It doesn't seem to stop murdering.
Yeah.
It lessens it, perhaps, but it doesn't stop it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're looking for an open and shut solution to
Yeah.
the policy problem for AI, you
Yeah.
won't find it in
Yeah.
the same way that you won't find it for anything else. There's some unique challenges specific to AI,
Yeah.
but those are not any different than the kinds of challenges you would face. I guess what I'm saying is, to me, the ethical and AI-related justice question is just more hyper-focused on the way that humans behave than the way that the technology behaves. Now, I'm biased. I'm a computer scientist. I have to defend what I do. But I've also done a bad job of doing this in some sense, right? If you look at it, it's like, well, we have the failure that is facial recognition or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'll be better in the future. But
Yeah, but Dolly's kind of fun though.
it is fun. It is fun. I asked it to create a mugshot of Jesus back when all of the different politicians were being arrested.
Love that.
And my favorite picture is, and I have it on my laptop if anyone wants to see it.
Oh, no.
It was a picture of Jesus with a mug in front of his face that said Jesus. A physical mug in front of his face, like directly in front of his face. And that was indeed a mugshot. Right?
I kind of dig it.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to go into another turn and talk, because we've kind of, when we talk about regulation, ultimately policy and policymakers, it's a political conversation. And Joy starts very firmly at the beginning of the book saying, me, a lot of my colleagues feel and felt that science, let's just say broadly science, apolitical. No need. We're academics. We're doing research. We're doing science. There's no politics in that. But then by the end of this, she's going, oh my God, we need politics because this has the potential to be so destructive. And so I want to ask you if you feel that way, or if you felt that way. Maybe your opinion changed through this book. Why did your opinion change? Like, what in this book made you maybe think about the necessity for politics to be involved in science? Or maybe you still feel strongly, keep it out. Keep on separation of church and state, politics and science. It's biblical. I would love to know your thoughts, because it's an actively debated topic among scientists, among researchers. I mean, it's something that actively goes very back and forth. And so I'd love to know your all thoughts. And we'll come back in like 5 minutes, and I'd love to talk about this. Because when we talk about, we need to regulate this, we need to set a standard, and she talks about NIST, to be the National Institute of Standards, being involved to an extent, although maybe not to the not in an, I don't want to say not in an acceptable way, but it's not 100%, and nothing ever will be. But inherently, it's political. You got to get political minds on board, and how does that, I guess, shape and change the discussion that you feel like you need to have for this technology? And because it feels like what needs to happen, and then maybe what is possible, very different things.
Politically, what is possible, I'm not sure about.
Yeah.
But I think the right way to handle it politically is probably a combination of educate and advise. Mm-hmm. The education is really important. I think if you try to advise without educating what's going on, it's never going to change.
Yeah.
Because if you say to somebody, we need you to make sure that you have this particular biometric bill of rights to protect human beings, somebody might ask why. And then you have to answer that question, not having told them anything about the technology and what's going on.
Yeah.
I think that's problematic.
Okay.
And I think it's just difficult. And then, all politicians by nature have different agendas. They've got different groups of constituents changing the way that they act on certain things or the way that they perceive certain kinds of activities. So you always have that kind of pressure to deal with as well. And I think some of the time when you're talking about that kind of environment, I am very biased because I'm an academician in an academic environment. I feel like I get to make the right scientific choice without worrying about any of those consequences. But it also means that sometimes I don't understand the nuance of what's happening in the real world. So it does actually take both sides of the conversation. Yeah. But in this place in AI today, I think we are in the other direction where true scientists need to give of their knowledge and of their understanding to increase and educate the people who are policymakers.
Yeah.
And what would be really nice is if policymakers didn't all have law degrees, if there were people there that, if there were some people that were, if it said something like, hey, 50% of Congress must be people in technology or something like this.
I'd take like cool. 2.
Yeah, we have 2. We probably have 2.
Yeah, that's fair.
They probably have 2.
Across the Senate and the House? Come on. 2 or 3?
At least 2 or 3. But
you got a couple millennials in there. At least they know how to use a PDF.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
And they do try to create these commissions that are mostly composed of these people, but they don't have policy power. They don't have the ability to design and direct and push policy. They only have the opportunity to advise and guide. Yeah. So the 10 people who are senators who are working with this commission, they might hear and learn some things, but maybe not all of them will be convinced. Not all of them will be taught what's going on.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of this falls under party lines as well. So, I mean,
Oh, for sure.
and I'm not trying to take the example of only the United States. It is, I mean, in general,
no.
this is a uniform thing.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
the EU also recently tried to tamp down, privacy and other kinds of things.
Oh, yeah.
They're a little more forward looking on this kind of topic. They're
Yeah.
more careful about data privacy, for example.
GDPR is
Um,
crazy.
Yeah. So there's a lot that I think we can learn from everybody, but we do need to figure out the right way to navigate that. I do not know the right way to navigate that.
Oh.
But I think it's important to try to figure out how to do it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you think that maybe what is happening currently is not, well, I mean, there's really not a lot happening. I mean, we've had directives, at least in the US from the Biden administration. And
Yeah.
to be fair, we've had directives from every administration since Obama to
Yeah.
be looking into AI and
Right.
trying to regulate. And sounds like we've had a lot of talking about, but it comes back to the beginning when we were trying to define AI. And if everybody comes and sits at the table and we all have a different definition and a different standard for this is what I think AI is, and this is what I think it should be. Well, I think this is what we should be talking about.
Right.
You're not even coming to the table with a standard,
Yeah. I don't think AI's definition is as amorphous and vague as we're presenting it in society.
Mm,
I think a lot of that comes from the fact that people tried to describe it in lay terms, which is what Joy did,
Yeah.
right? But she's trying to display that aspect of AI as an imperative to act,
Yeah.
right? And I agree with her imperative to act,
Yeah.
but she overstated what AI is in that sense,
Yeah.
right? Is it capable of those things? Sure. The way that any technology is capable of those
Yeah.
things, right? CRISPR is an
Ooh.
excellent tool.
Yeah.
Could it be used for remapping and rechanging all of the DNA of any human being? Sure. Theoretically.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Theoretically,
Yeah,
right?
theoretically.
Right? So, but is it in practice ever going to do that? We don't know, right?
Yeah.
But the technology is theoretically capable, right? So
Yeah.
there's a difference between those two concepts. So,
Yeah.
um,
What do you feel about what are your thoughts on AI sentience?
it's not going to happen anytime soon.
No.
We're at least 700 years away from it,
What?
at least, if not more.
What?
So,
iRobot's not happening in 20 years. Come on.
no, it's not happening. So
oh.
let me see if I can explain it this way. Every concept of AI sentience revolves around the fundamental idea that you have general purpose AI that can solve all kinds of different problems.
Mhm.
That does not exist. We only
Yeah.
have single purpose AI.
Oh.
We only have AI that does a task.
Yeah.
AI for Google Maps, that's AI.
Yeah,
it
yeah.
does one task.
And it rocks.
And it rocks. We don't do anything else. No one asks for directions anymore. Men
No.
across the world, in their stereotypic world, rejoice because nobody has to ask questions about directions at a gas
I
station.
still fully do.
I mean,
I
okay,
need so much help.
but
I
Google
will
is
be the
there for
exception
you.
to the
Google is there for you.
Dr. Google has always been
Has
there
always
for me.
been there for, and it always will be. But it's a very specialized tool.
Yeah.
And it gets things wrong. It got things wrong today. It took me off of 465 and then put me back on it for a supposed car accident that actually wasn't there.
Oh.
So I could have gotten here 3 minutes faster if I had ignored Google
Interesting.
Maps.
It did take me down the wrong way, down one-way street one time,
See?
and that was terrifying.
That was terrifying.
Yeah.
Right.
So
There
that's fair.
are walking streets that it says are roadways and people have gotten their cars stuck in them. This is a thing, right?
I mean,
There's
now
that
is that
office
including
at
the river, the canal
It's
drive
including
from
the-
last
yes,
year?
It does, yeah.
My GPS
Um,
told me to turn down this river. What are you
correct.
talking about?
Yeah. What about the episode from Office where I think Steve Carell runs off into the lake because the GPS told him to go there? Right?
True.
Yes. All
Yeah.
of these things are examples of AI making mistakes
Yeah.
in very limited circumstances. Back when Google first came out, do you remember page 2 and page 3 of Google searches?
I don't know when Google came out. I don't want to tell you how old I was.
15 to 18 years ago,
Okay.
people actually used to go to the second and third pages of Google
Yeah.
to find the answers they were looking for. Now, if somebody goes past the ads to the third hit on the first page, they are more informed than 98% of the populace. No one goes past hit
third
3.
result?
If it's not in the third result or higher, no one cares. You're dead to the world. You don't exist.
Well, I hate to tell you that I automatically scroll to like the bottom of the results and
You're
I click
doing
like
it
the
to
bottom
be
two.
you're doing it to be contrarian.
I may have started doing that because of you, actually.
See.
Ah.
But this is, I
There's
mean,
somebody at Google that's like, "Arr."
but the point is that we are depending more and more on AI. But
Oh,
the
yeah.
AI that we depend on is only specialized tools.
Okay.
It cannot do something general purpose.
Yeah.
And
Thank God.
the semi-general purpose tasks that we think of, like for example, driving a car,
Yeah.
that is a specialized individual task. It is
Yeah.
not trying to do your taxes at the same time.
Yeah.
It's not also trying to figure
Yeah.
out how to propose to this person that you really
Yeah.
like. It's not trying to do any of those things
Yeah.
that you would also associate with sentience. It's trying to do one thing: drive a car without killing anyone.
Yeah. Hey,
And it
same.
turns out that's super hard in and of itself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The fact that
We don't
human
do it
beings,
well.
we don't.
I
Yeah.
mean,
And in that sense, AI doesn't have to be better than everything. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be better than us. And since we suck as
Low
people,
bar.
it's
Yeah.
a very low bar.
Yeah.
But that also means that we need to recognize the failures of it, incorporate the failures of
Yeah.
it, and either address that with policy or awareness or both.
Yeah.
Right? If a person knows that the results from ChatGPT may contain hallucinations, may be incorrect, may
Yeah.
have this or that or the other weakness,
Yeah.
then they'll act accordingly.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody uses Bing anymore. Why? Because it's garbage and everybody realizes it.
Yeah.
They tried it for a while, but now nobody uses it
They
anymore.
tried.
They tried so hard. And then what did human beings learn? This is trash.
It's inferior.
It's trash.
Yeah. No, because you're right.
Right?
As one, especially if you're talking about like profit and like private equity, you've got to be better than the person using. Because if the person using it's like, oh, I could do
Right.
better in 2 seconds, then what's the point of using the AI?
Exactly.
You've got
Yeah.
to be better than the human
Yeah.
threshold. But
Yeah.
I guess they're lucky
Yeah.
that threshold's pretty. For me, it's pretty low.
And just to bash on Bing some more because I enjoy bashing on Bing, is that if you think about it, Microsoft has a significant stake in OpenAI.
Yeah.
They still haven't been able to make Bing reasonable, even with all of that AI-based power. They still can't make it better because it's just that bad.
Oh God.
It's so terrible.
You had every opportunity.
Yeah.
We were all rooting for you.
Correct.
Is Bing the one that is getting in trouble right now because they're providing false information, like really bad results? Like I can't remember if that was Google or if that was Bing. It's been trending on the internet.
Yeah,
That's true. I mean, I'm talking. They were like, "What temperature should I cook pork to?" And the answer is like 100 degrees, and it's like, okay.
Maybe they meant Celsius.
You know what? I had not considered that there are not freedom units.
Right.
Right. I've been out of science for too long. I forgot the standard unit. Oh my God.
Metric.
Yeah.
Metric or bust.
Yeah. Truly. What is a kilometer? Okay, we can come back. I'm having too much fun, and there's so much to talk about. There's so much to talk about because AI is so all consuming and so it's just everywhere. It's like I can't answer an email without the little like ding. Hi, I'm your smart AI email tech. I'm here to help you. You want to schedule that? No. I'm working at 11 p.m. and you're going to take this email and you're going to let me send it and you're going to make them suffer. Like I'm over it. You want to think about changing your language? No, I don't. I want to be rude to Brenda. It's slowly just wiggling its little digis into everything.
She deserved it.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
she fully did.
Yeah.
And I don't work with a Brenda, so if anyone I work with is watching this, don't ask. Don't text me. I love my job. Thank
What
you.
she's not telling you, she has a nickname for somebody in her office named Brenda, and she's just named that person Brenda. So,
And at 11 p.m., you're getting an email
yeah.
from me.
So if you received an email at 11 p.m. recently,
From me.
it's possible
Yeah.
you are Brenda.
You are Brenda. Okay, so science being political versus apolitical. I loved your answer, which is both are necessary. Honestly, both are necessary. I like the middle of the road. We need both. We
Both
need
and.
all. Both and yes and.
Yes.
Ariana said it best. Yes and. But so I would love to know your thought if you feel maybe strongly either way, or if you're like very middle of the road and you're like, I don't know, maybe both, maybe both. Porque no los dos. Like let's because I feel like I've gone back and forth. I'm gonna be really honest with you. And I liked your answer, and I think I'm gonna stick with that for now.
Okay.
I'm gonna stick with that. I think it's a good answer because you need the academics who don't have a political slant. They're just, I'm here to give you information so you can make an informed decision. You can be educated. You need to be educated. This is in every part of your life. Like here's the information, do with that what you will. But you made a really great point. You can say that to every single congressman, senator, legislator, and they might not have any idea what you're talking about. Calling Google and AI might make their brain short circuit. Genuinely, you can give them so much information, and if not a single person in that room understands it, you might as well have talked to a high schooler for 30 minutes. Nothing. So you need both, but you also maybe need. I almost feel like there's like a middle option. You need somebody who's like in the middle who can mediate both sides and who can be like, yeah, okay, here's this technical information. Here's, I know your platform. I know your goals as a politician. Let me help you incorporate that in a way that is, true to the data and true to the academic, but also true to your beliefs and your political, ideology and your political goals, even if you don't maybe understand that. It almost feels like there needs to be like a third, like a negotiator, like a hostage negotiator. We're like, okay, the AI, it's not sentient. Okay, Senator, it's not sentient. I Am Legend's not happening. It's okay. Like, I feel like I need a middleman. But does anybody feel strongly about like science? Like, does anybody feel like science should not be political under any circumstances, or feel the opposite? Like, yeah, science always is and always has been political. Because both are right, kind of in their own way. We saw, historically, we've seen, science, the final frontier, super political, but also like super necessary.
Oppenheimer,
Yeah.
another example of highly politicized conversation. And that,
Yeah.
That had lots of implications. Many people died and all of that
Yeah.
sort of. So I don't think you can extricate them. I think science is a part of life, and life is a part of science. You have to figure out how to manage them together. I don't think it's very productive to have science in its own corner of the room and everyone else in its own corner of the room. I think that's part of where the fear is coming from, right? If you don't understand it, you are inclined to fear it. So.
If you don't understand it, you're inclined to fear it. And I do fear AI. I fear Google a little bit. Yeah, Rufus? Political, not partisan.
Right.
I like that. We can choose to make them not partisan. Absolutely. And I think that's where that middleman comes in. Because if you don't understand it, you could so warp it into whatever you want it to be. And if you don't have somebody keeping you true to the data and true to the message and the reality, it could be so easy to take that technology either way. Do you fear that happening, or do you see that happening? What would you, like in a perfect world, what would you want to see happen like right now? Like legislatively, regulatory, like what do you think needs to happen and hasn't happened? Like your biggest fear about it or something in that realm? Because I feel like you would be the expert in the testimony. You'd be the person all the C-SPAN cameras are on.
Well, all right.
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure.
Joe Biden's right there. What are you going to say?
And I'm supposed to say something better than Joy. No, I think I think a big part of our fear of AI and our hesitation about AI and that technology is very, very honestly, it's about privacy and it's about data usage.
Yeah.
So I think the same way that we have siloed or tried to protect data privacy. I mean, it's fallen apart because everybody agrees to terms of use that are so long that nobody can read them. But
Yeah.
let's presume that somebody had simplified terms of use and we could decide, theoretically, we are supposed to have control over our data privacy. I think that's part of the reason that facial recognition and facial identification, both tasks, are considered so dangerous. What we fear is Big Brother kinds of responses. It's
Yeah.
not that we fear the technology by itself.
True.
So, for example, everything up until facial recognition doesn't seem very terrifying, right? Like Google Maps, we're cool with it. We like it. We in fact
Yeah.
would prefer it to our own decision making. Maybe you hate it, but
I love it.
largely speaking, it has made society better. And actually, weirdly enough, I don't know if there are any studies on this, but I feel like I maybe have read one or two
Okay.
that said that there are now fewer traffic congestions because people follow Google Maps, because
Oh.
things that are highly congested, if enough people are on Google Maps, it routes you around it. So it reduces the amount of additional
Love it.
level of traffic. That's a weird and totally unexpected positive. And it has
Yeah.
really big benefits in infrastructure reduction, minimized maintenance costs, better
Yeah.
quality roads, reduced sprawl,
Yeah.
fewer gentrified neighborhoods, fewer burned out neighborhoods. A lot of weird and unusual
Yeah.
benefits are coming as a result of
I'd
that.
have never thought of that.
More people go to weird local dives because they go on a detour that saves them 25 minutes because of traffic, and then they see
Oh yeah.
this hole in the wall place that becomes their best place forever, and then they
Yeah.
propose there, and their whole life is
Yeah.
based around that. That shuts down 5 years later. But I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I went too far somewhere in there. I forget where.
You got lost in the Google Maps.
Well, it was a hallucination, if you will. I'm being represented by an AI.
Oh God!
so-
Don't say that. But I mean that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm being represented by an AI. I wish I could. I wish I could like just put all of my like useless thoughts into an AI, and I could just like.
Can you identify as an AI? Is that
Can I-
something we could do?
Yeah, if
Can
I
we
could
just
just like,
say-
well, can I put after I put my brain in the jar because I
Mhm.
just want to scrub it. I want to take one of those like Brillo pads, just really get in
Can
there.
you clone the brain, put the clone in the jar,
Put the clone in the jar.
or put yours in the jar and then keep the
That
clone
sounds
that's
bad
been
for
scrubbed?
everybody.
So the
involved.
question is, if the scrubbed cloned brain comes back into you, are you in the jar or are you in your own head?
I don't like that. With the most respect, I hate talking to you because because everything terrifies me, and I go like, oh, I think like AI, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe I kind of understand, and then you're like, oh no, actually, it's terrifying and awful, and everything is like it's coming to get you. Did anybody else, and did you know this when I was reading this book? This was the first time I realized that the Facebook tagging photo like feature, it was like positive reinforcement, and like because at first I don't know if you were using Facebook way back in the day, like the boxes just kind of like appeared, not always on a person or a face, and then now it's like, oh, here's 3 people, and I think that's your mom, I think that's your brother, I think that, and then in the book she's like, oh yeah, they've been
100%.
training AIs on your photos, your tags, they're using that as like positive data, like okay, this.
Mhm.
I'm so sorry. My graduation photos and me tagging my grandma was like, you so hit the nail on the head. It's data privacy.
Yeah.
And that I read that and I put it down. I said, nope. I said, not today, Zuck. I'm not doing it.
How many people use Face ID?
Oh yeah.
Face ID, super convenient for many, many people. We're okay with that. We
Not
don't know what they're
anymore.
doing with it.
Not
We
anymore.
don't know what they're doing with it. But again, it has nothing to do with the technology.
Yeah.
It's not the technology that's problematic.
Yeah.
In fact, we've had the concept of facial recognition for years and years and years. The FBI keeps a roster of everybody who's wanted. And then anytime
Yeah.
you walk through an airport, they take a picture of you because they're matching it against those data sets. They used to do it by hand. They used to do it with a bunch of garbage algorithms. Now they do it with a better algorithm.
Yeah.
That algorithm has AI in it.
Yeah.
How much do we care,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you know,
Well,
it's a sliding
depending how
scale.
much you care depends a lot on what you're doing. And if you care a lot about that one, I got questions.
Well, and the point that I'm trying to make, and the point that you just made, is that it's about intent.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
not about the algorithm. It's not about the technology. I mean, there are some problems with the technology and the
Yeah.
algorithm. There's some problems with the data
Yeah.
that you use. Those are real problems. We'll eventually sort through those.
Yeah.
But the real issue, the real sticking point for everybody, the thing that causes fear, makes us worry about our AI overlords that are coming, is really about intent,
Yeah.
right? And those overlords won't land for at least 600 or 700 years. I mean, I think we're pretty safe.
Yeah. And Joy summarizes that very well. And I think it's like towards the latter half of the book, she's like, okay, don't panic. What you think, the sci-fi version of AI that you think is going to come and destroy you, don't worry about that. You should be worrying about what it's doing right now and who's using it and for what purpose. You got to be worrying about that now. Don't forget the sci-fi. Leave that to Marvel. Come back to reality.
Right.
So with that, I would love to open it up to a Q&A period. If anybody has any questions about AI they'd like to ask, or this book, I'd go ahead and sling them, because I do this every time where I'm like, I go through, I'm like, oh, I think this is fine. And then I'm terrified. And then you talk me down. You're like, no. It's not the tech. It's the people using the tech. So now I feel better.
And if we don't know the answer, we'll just ask ChatGPT to generate one for us. So it'll be fine.
Do you use ChatGPT regularly? Are you like a...
Don't.
Okay.
I mean, I just like to do stuff on my own.
Yeah.
But yeah, not really. Yeah. I mean, I use it to make mugshots of Jesus. That's my
good use.
And that's not even ChatGPT. That was DALL-E.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Are you like concerned or worried about how a lot of these, I mean, just big tech companies are positioning like large language models? Because I do feel like there's this portion of like, hey, we're going to put it in everything. We're going to put it in Facebook. We're going to put it in something that historically you would go for accurate information. But, you know, I think a lot of the frequency notion I see of people that they're like, I can trust anything I put in chat GPT, even though it's going to just give me something that's based on the pattern, not necessarily accurate.
Yeah.
So do I worry about it? Yes, but for a different reason than you stated. So the first thing is, what you're describing is this concept called the oracle complex, which is the idea that we just assume that things that come out of the computer are correct and perfect all the time. It's an oracle. We take it at face value. It is always correct. There is no possibility of an error. And we have lost or forgotten or decided not to employ our discerning ability to judge that information. We are no longer judging as much because we take more things as truth. Part of the reason is we don't know how it's getting the answer, and it seems good a lot of the time, so we've just conditioned ourselves to accept it, right? I no longer go to a restaurant that doesn't show up on Google Maps. They just don't exist. They're dead to me, right? Like, I mean,
No, true.
But the point is that weirdly enough, it turns out that if you don't have an online presence, in many cases, you don't exist. And this is actually called the shadow of Google. This is a well-known idea that if you live in the shadow of Google, you will not succeed. But anyway, the reason that I'm worried about what you're talking about is actually because it turns out that what's being implied is that if AI gives us power because it's using large amounts of data ingested to predict patterns, then what makes you powerful in today's world is how much data you have. And it turns out that no human single consumer can outplay Google or Facebook or Meta or anything else.
Yeah.
So it turns out that the new currency, in my opinion, is probably going to be data. How much of it do you have? The more you have, the more powerful you are. And it turns out that corporations are the best positioned to create that data. In fact, so much so that they're actually generating and creating and categorizing more data than governments across the world. So I fear that aspect of it. But again, why do I fear that aspect of it? Because of its use, because of its intent. If Facebook were a nonprofit, completely transparent entity, I would worry about their use of data less, right? It's their intent that worries me about it. And the fact that they're positioned to collect that data, and that's the new currency of the digital world, that's kind of the fear there. So that is both a yes, but not for that reason kind of thing. So yeah.
That's even more terrifying. I'm back up to,
Sorry.
I hate this.
Yeah.
And I want to go.
So my next answer needs to bring you down a notch.
Well,
is
because
what you're saying.
that's actually so much worse, because I was going to ask, because like if data is the currency, once it's in the private world, well, you know, because Meta's a great example because they have so much of it. Like there's no insight into the use of it.
Right.
They can do whatever. Okay, now we're not talking me off of that one. Ooh, is there like a reporting? Yeah.
I don't think there's one for AI specifically. I know that if you feel your data is being infringed, you can report it. It's kind of similar to what we had with unsolicited
The
phone calls,
junk calls,
drone
robocalls.
junk calls. I mean, we basically filtered them out. Interestingly, using AI, and we liked that. So
Yeah.
I just want to say,
Yeah, it's the fallout. I liked that very much.
See, AI does do some good things. I'm collecting all of these farmable phone numbers so that no one who was irritating will call you again. I'm on board.
Yeah.
You know?
No.
We get fewer spam emails than we ever did. Why? Because there's an AI filter in the background getting rid of all the Nigerian princes and all of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And all the different ways you can enhance body parts. All of that
Yeah.
stuff is gone
That's
from your
true.
inbox.
That's true.
So AI, we like that.
That's
So
a good point,
there are
though.
lots of reasons why we like AI and why we use it. The answer to your actual question is no, there is, as far as I'm aware, no such
No.
commission to report those kinds of issues. But I think part of the problem is I don't even know how you would report it with anything that is actionable.
And how would you know? If Facebook, if Meta was selling my search history, what? They're not. But
Well, they are selling your
Zuck.
search history
oh, well,
right
for
now.
sure,
They're
yeah.
doing it
But they're not giving
100%.
me a nice little red dot in the corner saying Mr. Zuck made $5 off of your search history. Like
They should. I feel
That'd
like
be
if they
great.
just offered everybody commissions for all of the data that we're offering for free, everybody would be quiet. It's like I earned a check for $312 from Amazon today.
I
Why?
think there are
Because they
people
used
doing
my
that.
my purchase history. But that won't ever happen. So
I think there are for biometric data, they'll offer you money
Yeah.
to wear like a Fitbit and make sure it's accurate. Yeah. But I mean, FCC for the phone numbers,
did I tell this example here about the Target?
and it haunts
thing?
me.
Yeah, the
And
Target
It
example.
haunts me.
It's so good. But
No,
I mean,
no, it's not.
such a good example.
Good is not the word.
It's a really good example of a case where we identified that AI was a problem. If you don't know the example, I'll tell you very, very briefly.
Yeah,
It's
share
that,
it again.
Yeah, because
Hurt
we
me.
need to hear more about this. So basically, there was a family that suddenly started receiving ads in mailed coupons at home for diapers and formula and all of this kind of stuff. And this father was like, what the hell? Why am I getting this information? So he went to the Target store and complained about it. And it ran up the tree. And then later on, he found out that his daughter was actually pregnant. AI was able to determine that this daughter was pregnant because their shopping history changed. She started buying more lemons or whatever it is, multivitamins or prenatals or whatever it is that she bought triggered that particular response. And they were right. They actually predicted before the father, they predicted before the medical doctors did that there was a pregnant person in that household. They determined it. Why is Target so interested in that? Because it turns out that if you make a purchasing choice when you're pregnant, you will probably stay with that choice for the next 3 to 5 years because you have no time to change your choices. And that is a real market driver. That's a serious thing. Any person you talk to, the stores they choose prior to the birth of their first child is probably what they will stay with for at least 3 to 5 years. So every person is trying to cash in on that. Every company is trying to cash in on that. They figured it out.
So great.
So good. Such a good example. Their AI was so good, we didn't like it. So this is an example of a case where it was so good that we found it to be invasive, right? But it used the exact same metrics that every other thing does. Why do we separate bread and milk in the food aisles currently? Because it turns out that we did a bunch of data collection. We realized people always buy these things. So we'll put them on opposite ends of the store. So you have to walk through the candy aisle and you have to walk past all this other stuff. That's a real thing. That's actually how marketing works today.
God, and it works.
In fact, Kroger put a single milk carton thing in the very front of the store to make you feel like it's convenient. Why did they do that? Because convenience gas stations found that they were getting a lot more business because you didn't have to walk from the bread to the milk. And so they said, we'll just put one refrigerator of milk.
One milk.
One milk right in front. And I'd like to point out that the milk that they put there is soon to expire. They do that intentionally because if you're in a hurry, you're not going to check the expiration date. So you're going to grab it and go. And so you'll be back. So they don't put the fresh milk there. They put the old milk there. Now, as a business, is this unethical? Is it problematic? I would argue if
compared to everything else you've said, no.
That's very benign and totally normal. No, but I mean, if you have a profit motive, your ethical responsibility as a corporation is to make as much money as you humanly can.
Yeah.
That seems like a perfectly reasonable way to make as much money as possible. And it reduces food waste. Look at us being so good.
Yeah.
Right?
Look at Kroger.
Look
a
at
bastion
Kroger,
of goodness.
a bastion of goodness, leading the charge today, right? But this is the kind of thing that we depend on. Amazon's recommendations, that's AI.
Oof. Yeah.
How many times has anybody bought something from an Amazon recommendation?
See, I don't do it out of spite. I don't do it out of spite. But
I've scarred you permanently.
You have scarred me permanently. And I will say the last time we talked, and this is the last thing I'll say before I close out. The last time we talked, I just gotten married, and I was telling you that I was getting a lot of like content about like getting pregnant, and like I was getting a lot of that kind of content. Now that I've been married for a few years, the content is how to discipline toddlers and how to raise children. And I have no children, by the way. Don't worry, Mom. So like I don't have children, never had children, but the content that I'm being fed and the ads it's gone from like, here's strollers, here's baby bottles, pumps, whatever, to now I'm getting like, oh, have you enrolled your kid in T-ball? And I'm like, what? Oh, how? But it continues to evolve. It's like, oh, you've been married 3 years now. Come on, get going. You T-ball. Listen, pre-K ain't gonna enroll itself. You better get on that list. And it's wild.
Do you want to reset it?
Yes, because I'm tired of seeing pregnant people on my timeline.
Google divorce twice and it will be over.
Let's go. All right, you're cooking. All right, now we're back.
I'm telling you, it'll start sending you information for divorce lawyers. All sorts of stuff, right? Have you thought about this apartment complex? I mean, all of the things that are associated with that, it will tell you all of them.
Did you sign a prenup? Click here.
Have you signed up on Tinder? Have you, like, all of it? It'll start over.
Okay.
The babies
I love that.
will stop.
Yeah. Okay, I love that.
And you'll
Thank
get
God
new problems.
my husband's in the room, so he'll understand when he's why this starts showing up in our search history. He's like,
sorry in advance.
Okay. I feel okay. You were right. You were right. You took me right back. I don't feel the doom and gloom. I feel which is good because I can't end the season on a bad note. So I want to first off thank you so much for sharing your expertise and all of your knowledge on AI. And if anybody wants to ask you anything, your department chair at Butler, easy to find.
Yeah.
Reach out because you are just a wealth of knowledge on this topic. And even though some of it's a little scary and a little overwhelming, you're great about being that scientific expertise. And I really appreciate that. Not just in this context, but also talking me off the ledge. I appreciate that as well. And so I just want to thank you all for coming for our season finale for the spring of 24. I can't believe I just said 2024. I'm going to throw up. But come join us in July, the last Tuesday of July, when we kick off our fall season. And I already know I'm not going to spoil anything. We have a couple of fun themes planned for the fall. So get your behind to H&M and come join us next season. And with that, have a great summer, guys. Pride Month is starting soon. Let's get it. Thanks.